Hey guys, welcome to the Q&A stream, assuming that it actually went live properly, the way that it's supposed to be. Thank you guys so much for showing up. I'm just happening to celebrate the fact that I finally hit 1,000 subs, which I guess finally is a weird word considering the channel's only been around for what, maybe 4.5 months? And yet you guys have been so incredibly supportive and freaking awesome that I've somehow managed to get all the way up to a 1K in such a short amount of time. So thank you guys so much. So welcome. Callan, you asked me this on Twitter. I'm going to give you the same dang answer. I'm not getting a snake. I have too many darn animals. For any of you guys who follow me on Twitter or hang out in the Discord, you've probably seen that one of the rats we got was pregnant and we were not told. So we've got 12 baby rats downstairs. In addition to the 5 we already had. So yeah, I don't need a snake at all. But I figure that I should at least kind of go over everything. So this is basically the same as Jen's kind of Q&A stream. Ask me questions, and if they're respectfully worded and not about drama, chances are I'll probably answer them. So do you guys have any questions for me? At the moment, I spent most of today working on the script for my latest video because Ocean's latest video kind of inspired me. I've been doing investigations into the concept of Hosios, so that's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, Freya? No, it wouldn't. Don't even joke about that. I love my rats far, far too much to ever do that to them. And the ones that we are planning on, like, once we raise them, getting rid of, we are going to make dang sure end up in good homes. What's my favorite color? This is actually an interesting question. So, I live in Washington, as many of you guys know. In the Pacific Northwest, if you live near the water and you see the sun kind of go down right when it dips down below the horizon, there's this kind of glow that extends. And if there's clouds in the sky, like on the horizon where the sunset is, but not later, like further out, closer to wherever it is that you are standing, you'll see this really gorgeous shade of like deep blue. And it's very hard to describe apart from calling it twilight blue. But that is my all-time favorite color on Earth. No, I am not the biggest fan of astrology in the least. I studied quite a lot of it back in my Wiccan phase, but it's not my thing. Like, there's nothing particularly scientific about it. It can be fun, but I don't think it's accurate. What made me want to do YouTube? I didn't to begin with, funnily enough. I kind of got dragged into it. So, for those of you who haven't watched enough of my live shows to kind of know the story of how I came into the community, back in the olden days, 2019, mid-2019, I got really freaking sick. I actually got sick toward the end of 2018. It turned out to be celiac disease, but because of an asshole doctor who didn't want to listen to me and my symptoms and was more interested in how much I weighed, I ended up bedridden because the complications of not being able to absorb my nutrients properly and being put on the bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast diet for my stomach upset for multiple months while I waited to, like get through the waiting list and actually get diagnosed. My intestine ended up so damaged that I was bedridden for several months and had to kind of recover over time. I even had to get 2 transfusions in like on Christmas Eve of 2018. So while I was kind of stuck in bed, I started watching a boatload more YouTube than anybody has any like reason to do. And one of the channels that I kind of picked back up was Pig Puncher, who now goes by Xander Hall. And I started going into his call-in streams when I realized he had a Discord. This is back when he was below 10,000 subs. Like, I was a fan of his Minecraft content back in the day. And we started talking about, after he released his video on pulling people out of the pipeline, how to pull my hubby out of the alt-right, and his audience got to know me. Well, during one of these call-in streams, I made the offhand comment that somebody should create a lefty version of PragerU that actually has facts and logic and research behind it. And before I knew it, I ended up getting put in charge of a team. I met Surus. Surus introduced me to the person I used to work with on that channel, and after the split, this channel came to be. Why did I stay in the community after the split? That's a much easier question to answer. And that's because, number one, a bunch of my friends kind of helped talk me out of my self-hate at the time. But two, it actually, I wanted to promote allyship. It was something that I saw only a bit of in the community, like from places like Hammered Out. But I think that it's really important, especially like with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Like, if we want real social change, we're going to have to fight for it. And like, we're religious minorities, polytheists and atheists. Like, it's not a good thing for us to feud with each other. You want to talk about coalition building? Like, this is key. The other half of the reason that I'm still on YouTube is there's not a lot of accessible Hellenist content, and as you've heard me rail on here many times, it's expensive as fuck to get really good scholarly sources. So I actually want to kind of make that more affordable for people who feel the call to the Greek gods. Now, that doesn't mean I'm trying to convert anybody, but if people are interested in Hellenism, it's pretty dang hard to construct a set of beliefs based off of what's accessible. I actually am thrilled with Hadestown. I'm actually thrilled with the fact that Greek gods are continued to be portrayed at all in pop culture. It means that, number one, the Messiah are still inspiring people, which is always exciting. But two, it actually drums up interest in ancient mythology, which is actually really freaking awesome. Like, I've always believed that, all fiction is in some way divinely inspired, that the gods of creativity have a hand in things. And so I think it's actually really cool, even when they're badly represented, like with freaking Disney's Hercules, like, they're still actually a net positive, I think. In fact, somebody turned me on fairly recently to the webcomic. I'm trying to remember the actual name of the freaking webcomic. It's about Hades and Persephone, and it's actually really, really interesting. Like, some of the gods' personalities are not quite what they were in mythology, but it's close enough that I really, really enjoy it. I actually covered what I think about sex worker exclusionary radical feminists in the interview I did over on Xania Bridge with Brazen Atheist, aka I'm trying to remember, Aaron Lewis. So if you want to know my opinion on swerfs and my opinion on sex worker positivity, go watch that interview. It's actually a pretty good one, and it's only about an hour long. Let's see. After Wicca, is there any value in Scott Cunningham's herb books? So he actually researches a lot of stuff better than most. I'd say that if you are in Wicca, you might find some use in them, but outside of that, it's really hit or miss. I mean, if nothing else, picking up his herb book and taking photographs of his references in the back might be a lot more useful than the book itself. I've watched a few of Religion for Breakfast videos. In fact, my do pagans worship demons video was in part inspired because I was irritated by how not in depth they went when it came to the idea of where demons came from. So I ended up wanting to kind of go further into the history and talk a little bit more about that. No, I don't. I have zero interest in magic. I used to, but since I became a Hellenist, I have no interest in it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it per se, though a lot of certain styles of magic can be, at least when working with the Hellenic gods, rather disrespectful. But personally, I've got no interest in magic. I think that the reciprocal relationship I've built with the gods basically precludes any need for it in my personal praxis. What is my favorite fiction book? So, funnily enough, there's technically two answers to this question. The first answer is technically a series. It's the Abhorsen trilogy by Garth Nix, which starts with the book Sabriel. And it's actually a quadrilogy, if I recall correctly now. There was another book that was published. So that series inspired me to want to be an author. I fell in love with it so hard that I ended up borrowing the books for 3 months from the library and reading them through 3 times. I was just that freaking obsessed with them. So that's one of them. My other favorite book is actually The 100,000 Kingdoms, which is also the start of a series by N.K. Jemisin. That book blew my freaking mind. I've reread it several times. I've studied it for writing techniques. It is just an absolutely fantastic freaking book. Cold brewed or hot brewed coffee? So cold brewed coffee is a pain in the butt to make, so I tend to prefer hot brewed coffee. I actually like espresso best, personally, in terms of flavor. But if you're talking about how I ingest my caffeine, tea is my favorite ingestion method. Oh, that's really cool. Like the green after rain. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. There's that lovely smell after a thunderstorm too, like that ozone smell. It's wonderful. Let's see. What are one or two examples of traditional Greek forms of divination? Have you tried any of them? What is your opinion on them and divination generally? So I'm actually working on a video on this. I got a book recently, a scholarly one, on Greek omens and the like. One of the biggest methods of traditional divination was the interpretation of omens, particularly omens involving unusual behavior with birds or like the way that smoke moved or things like that. I haven't tried any traditional Greek forms of divination yet, but I am digging into that topic. It's definitely like on my list of future video topics. I'm just kind of trying to get rid of get through the Hellenism 101 topics first. That way people kind of have a grounding in the religion before we start diving into more specialized stuff. Oh, thank you so much for the congratulations, Wick J. What's my favorite movie? Aliens. That is my all-time favorite movie. And technically, if I had to pick a director as well, funnily enough, it wouldn't actually be the person who directed Aliens. It would actually be I'm trying to actually remember his name. Sorry. It's that time of night, man. Like, there's a transition period in my medication. Like, I have ADHD. I'm pretty open with this. I take Adderall XR, and there's a transition period in my medication where my brain gets a little bit scrambled, and it's between about 5 and 6 p.m. PSD. So please bear with me. So John Carpenter is my all-time favorite director. I absolutely love almost his entire body of work, and especially They Live. They Live is probably my favorite movie from him. So that's probably the long answer to your question. Yes, Lore Olympus was the comic that I was thinking of earlier. Let's see, what else do we have in the chat? It's moving fast enough. I completely agree. What is my opinion on the Norse gods? I believe that they probably exist. I don't personally worship them. That's my opinion on the Norse gods. I actually think the same of the vast majority of ancient gods. They probably exist. It's just not my wheelhouse to worship them. Least favorite pantheon and why? I'm not particularly sure if I have one per se. I mean, probably the Christian pantheon because of all of the damage the followers have done. And yes, there's a frickin' pantheon because the Trinity is incoherent. But yeah, I mean, that's probably the closest. I have no idea why tomorrow is nervous, why I would be nervous for tomorrow. If you could elaborate on that. Do I have any Greek ancestry? Not that I know of. I am split down the middle, Haida on my mom's side and British on my father's side. Like, green card, he freaking came from Britain as first generation immigrant British. So as far as I know, unless I go do some hardcore digging, I don't have any Greek ancestry. I don't think that should matter for worshiping the Greek gods anyway, though. This is never going to happen, Callan. You will never get ownership of my server. Thank you so much, Gotham Girl, for your kind words there. Gotham Girl says, really love what you do concerning allyship, also bringing more info on Hellenism. I grew up surrounded by the Greek language and culture, but I still don't know enough about Hellenism. Well, you're welcome. I work my butt off on those videos. They seem like they're a lot less popular than like my more broad content, but they're the ones that I kind of, they're the ones that I pour my soul into, for lack of a better way to put it. Thank you so much. By the way, Meredith, that's very, very kind of you. Let's see. Oh, same gender identity? Thank you. Like, I'm glad that was reaffirming for you. It took me quite some time. Callan had a pretty heavy hand in me figuring out that I was gender fluid and that I went by she, her, and they, them. And that that a lot of my dysmorphia from my eating disorder came from dysphoria. That was a long and difficult conversation. If you guys haven't seen Transgardr, I actually did. If you look it up, it's TRANSGARDR. I did an interview over on Transgardr fairly early on in their channel, like starting up and talked extensively about how I came to understand my gender identity. So if you're curious about that, I have done an interview on it. What is my favorite pre-Christian religion's culture beside my own? Probably, if by my own, do you mean Haida or Greek? Like, beside my own religion, there's a little bit of vagary. I'm going to assume that you mean both Haida and Greek, in which case I would say probably ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian culture is freaking fascinating, and back when I was a Wiccan, I actually had a pretty deep interest in it. Eris is somebody that you do not want reaching out to you. I am sorry if you've been reached out to by Eris. Eris is effectively a goddess of absolute chaos. There's pretty much nobody in ancient Greece who had anything positive to say about her. She is somebody that you very much want to avoid. At what point do you think a person should consider becoming a Pastafarian? It depends on how passionate you are about your atheism. They're an incredibly fun mock religious group that, as far as I know, might actually do a lot of fighting for atheist rights. So if you want to support a cause like that, do some research into them and have at it. Like, they have a lot of really fun joke stuff. And I think that that's a lot better than the tendency that some anti-theists have to, say, try to use modern pagan religions or ancient pagan religions to mock Christians and such. Hey, Ocean. Happy to see you. Let's see. What is my favorite type of music? Any chance that I'm a metalhead? Ha! I absolutely am a metalhead. So funny, fun times. My favorite types of music are fairly broad, but the majority of what I listen to falls under the rock and various subgenres of metal category. I also listen quite a bit to electronica, and my favorite subgenre of electronica currently is synthwave, which of course it would be. If you're a metalhead, then you probably love 80s rock, and I definitively do. When talking to the lay, how do you distinguish between what, quote, we believe, your UPG or Doxa, and what the commonality of orthodoxy would feel comfortable with stating something as the we position? Okay, so I'm actually trying to kind of, your phrasing is a little ambiguous here. Can you kind of give me a little bit more elaboration on what you're asking? It sounds like you're asking what's the difference between like UPG and personal opinion, and what commonality of opinion would have been, like, what, in ancient times, or what reconstructionists should take from that. Like, elaborate a little bit on the specifics you're looking for here, and I'll try to answer your question for you a little better. What is my favorite type of star, and why is it a neutron star? White dwarfs are interesting. I mean, we can't really see them all that well, but they are interesting. Thoughts on the God of War franchise and how it interprets mythology? God of War is not a franchise I've actually played. It's something I've seen quite a lot about. People tend to dunk on it pretty heavily and tend to use it to dunk on Hellenists, like, oh, Kratos killed all of your gods. So my opinion on it is that people have opinions on it, but I haven't played it, so I can't really give you one as a gamer. What was my political journey like, and what brought me to anarcho-syndicalism? What's funny is I think I've been an anarcho-syndicalist for most of my life without knowing the words. But in terms of my political journey, I started off as fairly conservative growing up as a Christian, but with the sense that there was something wrong with that, if that makes sense. Once my great grandma and my great aunt and my aunt and my grandma started taking care of me over the summers for, several years between the ages of like 6 and 12 or so, there's a lot of gaps in my memory because reasons, trauma and stuff. I've talked about my family life kind of being shitty, but those summers were some of the greatest joys in my life. And being taught a lot of stuff about my native culture, or at least the things that were passed down of it to me from the family that grew up, on the island, so to speak, taught me a lot about the way that thought can be, if that makes sense, about cooperation, about unity, about not just familial bonds, but also the bonds of, say, tribe and village and culture. And so, like, that, I think that's part of what set me up to stop being a Christian, to be honest. That's probably where all those niggling, like, nagging feelings of, hey, there's something fucking wrong here, started. So later on in life, when I hit college, I met up with a buddy of mine, I won't say his name, but he was an anarchist, and he ended up giving me a lot of anarchist type literature. Now, he was an anarcho-primitivist, which I disagreed with him a bit on some things, but the longer we were involved, and eventually the more I got involved with Occupy, because that was something I ended up deciding to do with him, and ended up like kind of in a pseudo leadership-ish position with whatever sort of leadership one could say existed in Occupy. We had these caucuses basically, and we had people that would go up to speak, and I was often voted to be the one who went up to speak to talk about the demands of the caucus. You know, no matter how much one tries to eradicate leadership positions, there is a certain degree of that still exists even within anarchism. The deeper that I got into that, and especially seeing the violent like police response when I was under 21 to that protest, really kind of sent me down that path. So I ended up studying literature in college and later on when I started talking with Xander Hall and Vosh and all of them, which just kind of gave me names for a lot of the positions I think had been building through most of my life. I tend to drink tea hot. How do you like your tea, hot or cold? Black, herbal, white, oolong, green tea, tea bag or loose leaf? Have you done the tea ceremony tea brewing before? I've never done tea ceremony brewing. The answer is I drink all the tea, just all of it, all of the freaking time. Oolong is the only one that I'm a little bit iffy on, but I even tend to drink quite a lot of matcha, which I really enjoy. And I also really, really like mate tea as well. So there you go. What is my favorite scientific area outside of things relevant for Reconstructionism? Paleontology. That was my first major in college. I eventually switched to nutrition after I figured out that I basically had to wait for somebody to die to become a paleontologist. But for several years, I actually volunteered at the museum at my university, like helping out with preparatorial work and doing all kinds of like scientific research type stuff from the geological department. So that was a lot of fun. Hydes, best god of death or most boring in terms of mortal interaction? Yes. Hydes is not boring in terms of mortal interaction. In my Hydes video, I actually talked about his epithet Pluton, which, you know, is sort of bringer of wealth and also the person who helps with generating seeds. Like, there's a lot that goes into Hydes. It's just hard to find it. You know, there's a lot of things that were kind of common knowledge that were just not talked about as much in writing because they didn't think it was important. What's my philosophical viewpoint on the TARDIS? It's kind of scary that somebody wields that much power over the way that timelines go. Like that's terrifying. Like Doctor Who terrifies me. Let's see. I have a conundrum. I like writing fiction and used to read fiction, but have transitioned to liking nonfiction. Is there a way I can improve my fiction writing while liking nonfiction? Well, for one thing, studying craft is really important. For another, you can like nonfiction and still read fiction. It's usually really good to read things that are, say, award-winning or published in top publications in the genre of fiction that you're trying to write, in part so you can study what's considered to be the best, but also so you can kind of build your internal understanding of genre, which is really, really important if you want to write genre fiction. Dang it, I am like getting scrolled all the way to the bottom repeatedly. Let's see. Trying to find another one. Give me a hot second. Are the streets of my avatar aesthetic or do they hold a deep symbolism? Actually, both. So the avatar that I use is based off of a character that became associated with me through like role playing and such, way back in the day, like back when I used to do that. But the redo of it that GaelicNox did is there's two bits to it. Number one, I'm actually supposed to be wearing a peplos, which was an ancient Greek sort of robe. It was a single piece of fabric that would be pinned over the shoulders and like wrapped with a belt sort of under the breasts if you had them, or just sort of under the chest if you didn't. And that is symbolic. You were supposed to put a clean one on when you went to worship the gods. The wings are actually a tattoo that I have. Raven on one side and eagle on the other, and they are symbolic of my moiety from my mother. I am Haida, and that's where they came from. So let's see, what else do we have here? And I'm I'm just talking about Eris from a recon perspective. She was considered to be hateful to mankind, would walk, in the mythology on the battlefield and devour men's souls and stop them from going to Paides and all kinds of other things. She is just, from a recon perspective, she's not the best deity to interact with. But if you have UPG and you have experiences with her that are positive, I'm not going to begrudge that to you. How has my Haida ancestry and family teaching informed my Hellenism? Well, I can't say that it hasn't impacted it at all. What I can say is that the ways in which it's impacted it are probably a bit different than what you might expect. For one thing, it's made it basically impossible for me to be a Platonist, because universalizing what deity is very, very difficult when you come from the background of someone who has been taught that deities and spirits and such are multifaceted and can sometimes be very dangerous. This idea of universal goodness is just not the best thing. Apart from that, I would say it hasn't informed my Hellenism as much as you'd think, though I don't think that they're incompatible with one another. I don't think I've actually seen what a sea bunny is. No idea. Yes, I know you're also known as Nervardia. I didn't know if you wanted me to say that on stream. So I was trying to respect you. Yes, metalheads unite. Absolutely. I freaking, I've been obsessed with metal for most of my life. All right, let's see. I'm not against chaos. If chaos was always on the side of evil, it would have the same order to it and would not be chaos. Eris is a deity I'm drawn to, as well as someone who feels her reaching to me. So chaos in an ancient Greek Reconstructionist perspective was not a positive thing. Most of the entities with which were very considered to be close to Gauss, like within Theogony, if you look at, say, Nyx emerging from Gauss and the primordials, it is very clearly shown within that mythological framework that Gauss was considered to be terrifying, disorderly, and very much not in the best interests of humans, versus the deities that emerged from it, the later deities, which actually were arbiters of divine order. So that's not, chaos may not necessarily be a negative thing, but it certainly doesn't have human interest at heart. Who are my gods? I worship the ancient Greek gods. I also pay some deference to the Haida deities and spirits as well, and I pay deference to my ancestors. So I don't consider ancestors to be gods, obviously, but I do pay deference to them. Have I ever done psychedelics? I'm not legally allowed to answer that question, but I might mention that maybe when I had hit my tween years, I might have actually, consumed a wavy cap mushroom that had been properly prepared in ritual setting, as was legally allowed. What phases did you have in your pagan journey, and what exactly was the switch where you became a Wiccan all the way to where you are now? And how long do you feel you will be here for? I actually talked about that in a video on Neil the 604 Atheist channel. Look at his deconversion stories featuring Aliakai. I went fully in depth with that as far as my journey goes. Have you played the game Yume Nikki? It's awesome. No, I have not. Let's see. I'm trying to find, it skipped all the way to the bottom again. Give me a second. Let me go back to where I was. Patience, guys. Paleontology is cool. Ever participate in an actual dig? Yes, for a brief period of time, I actually worked over at Ash Falls in Nebraska. As many of you know from listening to histories that I've talked about of kind of the way my life has gone, I lived in Omaha for a few years, and there was an opening for the summer program before I got into uni for people to go and work at Ash Falls. And one of the cool things about Ash Falls is that when you are digging things up, or at least helping out with it, in my case, I helped out with cleanup. We weren't actually directly doing the digging ourselves. What they do is they actually leave the bones in the ground in exactly the positions they're found in and kind of excavate around them so that they can see the positions in which those bodies were buried. So that's one of the most fascinating things. That and Ash Falls is a unique site in that there was this massive volcanic eruption that happened and rained down crap loads of ash, but not enough to kill the animals immediately, the way that you might find at other sites that have very fine fossils like that. So we actually get to see the long-term sort of consequences in the bones of ash exposure, kind of like, what we're dealing with these wildfires, but over, say, years rather than just days. What are my opinions of Apollo? Apollon is one of the gods that I worship. I tend to worship him on Sundays. He's a god of music and light and song and also healing. I haven't worshipped him as extensively as some of the other deities, mostly because I tend to feel closer to the Mosai when it comes to inspiration. But he seems to have this warmth about him, and forgiveness also, if you take a look at his mythology. So I don't have a negative opinion of him in the least. Let's see. Do I have any issues with tables? What, are you talking about, tables of info or table? I don't, everything that is currently that I'm operating with is sitting on a table. I don't know what you're asking me, Norvardia. Help. Favorite mythological creature or monster, and why isn't it Minotaur Girls? My favorite mythological creature is actually a Naga, just because I'm fascinated just with sort of hybrid creatures in general. And growing up, I just loved art for Nagas and such. It's pretty simple. I have thought about writing fiction from time to time, especially with COVID, but I'm not sure where to start exactly. Any advice, particularly for the first book? So my advice is don't write a book the first time. Cut your teeth on short stories and other shorter things because they're easier to complete and will help you build the discipline to write. Also, my best advice is study craft, look up books and things on everything from narrative structure to character design to, genre and what genre means to, character arcs and such, to the way, descriptions work. There is a lot more that goes into craft than you initially think. And the more things you try to do and fail, the better off you're going to be. My other bit of advice is find yourself a critique group, especially one that is experienced and not just one that's kind of, hey, we're a gathering of a whole bunch of newer people, because you can learn a lot from having your work torn apart by other eyes, things that you might not be able to see. I think that anarcho-capitalism is absolutely 100% just, it's a contradiction in existence. It's basically irony personified. There are far too many structures of hierarchy that are built into capitalism itself for anarcho-capitalism to be any kind of viable. Graham Lexing, thank you so much for the congrats on the 1,000 subs. Yeah, I completely agree with Comrade here. So Comrade says, Eris is one of those deities from a recon perspective. If your praxis with her should mostly be, please ignore me situation and maybe give offerings to appease her so she doesn't bother you. A lot of people who recon Hellenism from an earlier period, particularly Athenian recon, view Hecate in much the same way, though Hecate had some positive aspects to her. Eris was never really spoken of in any positive light throughout Greek history. Hecate was, hey, you don't necessarily want her attention, but there are some things in which she's helpful. Eris was basically just nope, don't even look at my fucking house. Again, from a recon perspective. Yeah, Ocean, that's a mood. Ocean says, I'd have questions, but we ran to each other so much I don't have any. How do I follow through with multiple projects? Well, there's two steps to this one. Number one, I have a planner in which I set aside for myself three major tasks each day that I need to complete. One of them is almost always related to video work, unless it's one of my 2 days off. One of them is related to writing, and generally one of them is related to health type things, like, hey, going out for a long walk or putting in my workout or something like that. By setting aside the things that are the most important each day and making sure I check in by the evening time to get to see if I got them done, helps keep me focused when I've got multiple things. I also tend to keep lists in the back of that same journal, which the one that I use is the Heroes Journal. I absolutely freaking love it. I'm not sponsored by them. I'm just completely in love with the structure of it. It helps keep me focused, and also keeping a list of breakdowns of all the various tasks I need for each of those things. Like, hey, I need to do research for the video. I need to read this. I need to do the script. I need to do the recording. I need to edit the audio. I need to do the editing for the actual video itself, et cetera, et cetera. I need to go, the other day, one of the tasks was I need to go find a stock footage subscription and figure out which one I want. When I keep these things organized all in one place, even though I've got ADHD and I buck against structure, I don't tend to assign myself, hey, at this specific time, I'm going to do this thing. These are the things I need to get done before the end of the day. And I put a star next to the one that's the most important for me to get done. So that's how I manage doing multiple projects. That, and just having worked as an author for so long, having the discipline to get multiple projects done has just sort of come with that. I often have sold short stories while working on my novels, and that's just a matter of survival if you're trying to live off of your writing. Do I think evolution did a bad when it invented upright rocking? I mean, clearly our ability to outwalk all of the everything, to the point where, stuff runs from us, and we can just walk for freaking days and just perpetually be there. Clearly it gave us some kind of evolutionary advantage. Otherwise we wouldn't have the brains we do. Let's see. I did a jump to the bottom again. Crap. Okay. I'm trying to find the next thing. Would I consider doing a video on anarchism and the Greek roots of the word? Anarchism is something that I might actually do videos on. The old Project Collective U, which was defunct, me and one of the original participants are kind of looking at reviving it. I will let you guys know if we do. I'd probably do a video over on that channel, because I'm not sure if it quite fits the wheelhouse of what I'm doing here. Have I ever tried learning Greek? I'm currently studying Homeric and Attic Greek at the same time. It's a very foolhardy thing to do. I do not recommend it. But that is, when you hear my weird pronunciations in a lot of videos, that's where a lot of those pronunciations come from. They might not be perfect. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're fairly far off, but I'm trying, dang it. I'm trying to read the epics and Hesiod's work in its original languages, as well as some of the philosophical works that I really enjoy, which are in Attic. How do I make my videos, and what is my process of doing so? So step one is I have to pick a freaking topic, and I actually have a list for this. I have a document that is called the Idea Bank, and every time I come up with an idea or fall down a rabbit hole and get really interested in something, if it's not what I'm working on right now, I'll put it on the document. And I've tried to organize the document kind of into a pseudo organized fashion, where it's okay, well, before I can do ritual structure, I've got to talk about prayer. So, ritual has to go below prayer. The afterlife, I can kind of fit whenever, so it goes into its own category. But that's kind of, I have the rough list underneath everything, and then I move stuff around periodically. So that's where the topic decisions tend to come from. That, and because we do the Pagan Bar Crawl, which we'll be talking about a bit more on Monday, Wolf the Red's going to be on Xenia Bridge, and he'll be talking a little bit about organizing it and kind of what it's about. I will sometimes check in with other creators to see what they're doing, if there might be something fun to theme together, or if they're interested in potentially taking a look at the scripts if it's a contentious topic. Ocean and I work together pretty close when we did our videos on folkism, for example. Next step is research, especially if it is not just a basic response video. If it's, any sort of reconstruction or something, I will go digging through what books I have. I'll go digging through JSTOR. I usually spend sometimes up to 2 to 3 days just reading books and taking notes and putting sticky notes and making notes on paper of the different references that I think might be useful. where it is on the page, what page it's on, etc. Then I moved to the phase of outlining and making my script. Some scripts are more complex than others, and I actually have to write an outline. Some of them I have a fairly good idea from start to finish of what I want to say, so it's pretty easy to figure out how to structure it. And I'll start drafting the script. I give it another day, and before I record, I'll do a passover to make sure that my language is kind of cleaned up and that I'm getting rid of any sort of unnecessary filler words. That way, when I record, I know that I'm going to be putting forward the best version of my arguments. Sometime in between those two steps, I might send it to a friend to take a look over it. Again, if it's a contentious topic, I did this with my folkism script. I also did it with the anti-theism script. I sent it to almost all of the atheist allies that I know and had them look over it to make sure that the arguments were strong and that they weren't attacking atheism. I was just going after anti-theism. So afterwards, I then do audio recording in Adobe Audition because I ended up deciding to go with the Adobe suite. And I clean up the audio. I remove all of my breaths, all of the mistakes. I clean up the background noise using some of the features in the program. Then I move the audio over along with, hey, Ocean, welcome to the stream.
I didn't do it.
I move the audio over along with various assets that I use every stream. If you notice, I've got the looping background that I use in pretty much every video. That gets moved over along with all of my avatars and stuff like that. And then I go through piece by piece and listen to the audio over and over again and move whatever images or stock footage or, avatar movements or whatever it is that I'm going to add. This is also when I will type up any quotes that I might need out of the books. If you notice, some of my videos have direct quotes from scholars and stuff in them. I generally will type those up and put them in a separate document so I can just move them over and copy paste them into Premiere, because otherwise it's a royal pain in the butt to go digging through a book while I'm trying to type and deal with Premiere being a butthole. The last step I do is I actually will customize a soundtrack in a program called Filmstro. It's a program that lets you do various sliders and things to adjust individual tracks of music, everything from like messing with the vocals to messing with guitars. And I will go through my video and listen to it through the program and move the various slider bars to give the background track a decent sound. And I'll lower the audio mixing on the background track so that it's not overly obnoxious, but so that I can kind of give it a whatever feel it is that I'm looking for that video. So that's the full process. I hope that was useful. Let me know if you have any more questions.
My answer to that is I don't have a process at all. There's no, I don't even make videos, to be honest with you. I don't know what I'm doing. I just turn a camera on and wing it. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it, but most of the time it doesn't. So, that's where I'm at. How about you?
I hope that wasn't overly in depth for some of you that weren't all that interested. It was incredibly in depth.
You went into the a lot of the nuances of video production that piss me off when I'm doing them. Because when I'm doing the
audio editing is the worst part of editing. All right, video editing can be fun, but audio editing is it is my least favorite part of the process.
Which is part of why I'm fine with switching over to the being on camera thing, because now what happens is I just go, oh, I can't sit there and micromanage my breaths and mouth noises that I fucking make. I just throw them all in there. Whereas when I was doing cartoon avatar setup, the work is harder, honestly. It's like a lot of the little things that you would do, you can clean up your audio, but if you start trying to take out breaths and stuff like that, like I would do with prior to switching over, good God, it's it adds an extra 2-3 hours sometimes if you want to really do it right, which I know that you're doing. You're putting in all of that fucking time, and it's a ton of effort, y'all. Allie puts in some hard work into her stuff.
Yeah, it's a near full-time job for me. Legit, I spend probably on average between 30 and 50 hours working on a video. Especially for example, the J.K. Rowling mega collab. I spent over 30 hours over the course of 3 days doing the editing for that video because I had to balance audio, like I had to balance audio levels and all kinds of stuff, you know, try to clean up people's footage, cleaning up people. It's a lot more work than it seems like it is. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, especially when you
Avatar stuff.
When you include like the stuff that we're both doing a lot of, like research, you know, like, you know, by each of the gods, holy shit, why do we do all the research that we do? And like, because I know that you know, your nose is stuck in a book probably like 7 days out of the week. And like Allie says she has days off. On her days off, she's reading. That's what's going on.
This is not like, inaccurate.
I have free time. I'm going to read this book on Hesiod. I'm like, and I'm going to get a voicemail about it. That's what's going to happen.
You and Jen both. Whichever one of you replies to me is the one who gets the voicemail about it.
And that's what happens. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, now I get to learn about Homer today. And yeah, today it was let's have 3 hours of back and forth about the Euthyphro dilemma, because Allie saw my video and is like, I've got things and opinions and all sorts of stuff. So we wound up discussing the Euthyphro dilemma in detail, going in, and with Allie going into the Greek translation and saying things I didn't know. So I learned. And
I talked a bit about like lexicographical stuff and semiotics, and
I can't read. So when you start talking about stuff like this, flies completely over my head. I've got no idea what's going on. And
for those of you who are looking into recon, learning about semantics, like not semantics like, oh, word choice, but the actual study of semantics and semiotics will do you a huge favor when it comes to like understanding ancient culture. Like there is so much more that you can learn from learning bits and pieces about the way words were used. And that's actually most of what my video is about this week. My video is about a lot of things this week, but that's most of what it's about.
Recon is funny because it's religion with homework. And I have, let's see, that's on necromancy. There's a thing in here where you wind up seeing like, this isn't as common with Greek stuff, but with Norse stuff, you wind up seeing like everything's colored with Christianity because they're the ones that are writing things down. So let's see.
So Ocean is staring intently at the
I'm
symbols,
staring intently
hoping
at
that
the
they
book.
will hope.
Yeah, no, hope that I can't read. So
Calcifer's going to read it to him psychically, and that's how we're going to get anything.
He communicates to me in runes. So, but anyway, let's see. He starts talking about, like, this is Saxo Grammaticus. He starts talking about these wizards that lived up in the north. And he's like, you know, it is worth telling you that there were these amazing species of wizards, each practicing their own miraculous illusions. And then he goes into the different kinds of gods. So like you have like little moments like that. Like nevertheless, their minds were deluded with their with people that believed in their divinity. So like you have little moments like that keep popping up in these texts, and you're like, oh shit, I gotta like read through that.
So this is actually a very easy question to answer. My answer is that the actual subgenre that Lovecraft founded is fantastic and a wonderful form of self-expression for those of us who like to write genre fiction. Lovecraft himself was a prat. He was a racist fuckwit, and it is very hard to go back and read his stories as an adult, understanding what I do about the commentary that he makes on the world.
I've never read him, but when I did accidentally buy the Necronomicon because I thought it was like a historical religious text at one point. This was your fluffy bunny phase. No, this wasn't. I didn't really have a fluffy bunny phase. What happened was I was like, oh, I really want to get into other religions, and this is when I was like much younger, and I was like, oh, well, you know, I want to get a copy of like a lot of the other holy books. So I started looking for other holy books, and then I found the Necronomicon for sale, and I was like, oh, well, this must be one of them because I've heard about this a lot, and then I started reading it, and it was like just weird. And I was talking to somebody about it, and he was like, "Why'd you get that?"
I mean, to be fair, I'd be just as confused.
And then I started learning. Oh, but this was like before I like in my teens.
So, what are my opinions on syncretism with regards to reconstruction? I don't think there's anything wrong with it inherently. I think that it is better advised if it's got historical backing behind it, because again, that I'm a quote unquote stuffy recon in my own personal praxis. I would be far more interested in syncretizing with deities that were syncretized during the era that I'm trying to reconstruct from. However, for those of you who decide to syncretize with paths that never interacted historically, my answer to that is do so with care if you're going to. It's your path, but make sure that you pay close attention to what works and what is compatible between the two systems. Again, coming from the perspective of a recon, I'm not invalidating anybody's path. I tend to be more of a multi-traditionalist personally. I practice Haida stuff alongside my Hellenistic stuff, but it's kind of a difficult thing for me because I don't let them interact all that much, just because they are such different systems. They're not incompatible, but they're not compatible directly interacting with each other in a single ritual, if that makes sense.
I'm a dirty syncretic and a recon, so my perspective is a little bit different. I've moved my mic into a weird new position, so let me know if you can. If my
you're coming through just as clear, it sounds like.
Okay, that's good. But so for me, basically, I have my central tradition, and then the syncretic perspective is adopting other deities into that tradition. So you basically are, for example, I venerate Fortuna, but I do so in a heathen way. And because I don't, that is the grounding of my relationship with Fortuna, is through that process. Now, I know some CDR recons would, clutch their pearls and freak out about how I'm not approaching Fortuna in the right way, but it's worked for me. And that's how syncretic traditions go, is you would have people that would travel and then come back with, oh, here's another deity. And then the populace goes, oh, cool, we'll engage with that deity in the same way that we've engaged with all of our gods. And that works. That's how Apollo moved from Gaul to Greece, supposedly. You might know more about that than I do. But there's definitely some elements of traveling deities in that respect. Aphrodite, for example, just shows up in several pantheons.
Yeah, Aphrodite is one of them. Ishtar is another one that actually had aspects of her syncretized with Aphrodite. Because another form of syncretism historically is adopting, this is our love deity, this is their love deity. Their love deity has these aspects. Let's put some of those aspects on ours. And that's another example of syncretism from a historical perspective.
Right.
That's something that's done a lot less in the modern day, because that's not really a product of cultural exchange anymore per se. But that's another example of the way the syncretism can function. I personally am just uncomfortable doing it because between the two traditions, the level of trust extended by the Greeks in their deities is not compatible with the absolute danger that is presented, at least was presented to me by my, family with the Haida deities and spirits. Like, honoring them in that sort of structured, formal way doesn't feel right to me. But there are some traditions, like you've talked about Celtic stuff before as well, and heathenry, and those don't seem completely unable to be intersected the way that it feels like Haida and Greek stuff would be.
A lot of my syncreticism is kind of in one little area, so a lot of the cultures they've intermingled in the past before, so there's examples in some cases of how syncretism works. And then the stuff that I borrow from Taoism is mostly philosophical. So, there's not really a big disagreement there. I had something else to say. Oh, comrade. One of the things that I find to be really interesting about syncretism is looking at historical examples of it is Christianity, Christo-pagans, like people that followed both Thor and Christ in history. they're really interesting to look at for when talking about syncretism. And people are asking what I'm drinking. It's coffee. It just happens to be a wooden mug. It's not. It's early. I promise.
Am I ever going to do a video on the household deities of the Hellenic path? Yes, but as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about organizing topics, I have a lot of things I need to do first in order to lay the groundwork for talking about like household veneration and, like, for example, like I said, prayer, ritual structure, and, for example, epithets. I have to go over the way that epithets function within Hellenic religion, especially over time, before I can then talk about, okay, well, these are deities in their household aspect, and this is why they were honored on these days.
Us dirty heathens say kennings.
So yes, that is coming, but it's going to take quite a while. Yeah, apparently, we've got some standing of
I don't know what that
fans. So let's see if the ocean mythos deepens.
Yep.
All right. The idea of gods being not only incredibly powerful but completely uncaring or against humans is an interesting premise. So within Greek mythology, there actually is that idea.
There's a ton of information on that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sorry. Ocean, you could probably talk about that from the heathen perspective as well. But the primordials, at least during Homer and Hesiod's time and in their work, were very much seen that way. Gaia she ended up widely worshipped later in history during the Hellenistic period, but for a good chunk of Greek history, Gaia, Nyx, Oranos, several of the Titans, including Kronos, they were honored very little because they were considered to not honor reciprocity. They were considered to be primitive and dangerous and not all that interested in humanity, such so that Homer actually refers to Nyx as being terrifying even to Zeus, which is a really interesting concept for somebody who, say, like, is a Platonist and thinks that all the gods are 100% good. Why would they be scared of one another? Oh, you're just misinterpreting the myth. But anyhow, like, that idea is very much present, that there are some deities that do not have the best interest of humans in mind. So go ahead and talk, go ahead, Ocean. You probably got a better perspective on some of that than I do.
About the Jotun and stuff?
Yeah, about the Jotun.
Well, there's people that follow the Jotun. It's called Thursatru. And it's kind of like there's a lot of like kind of attitudes about it. There's different like kind of atrus, you might say. There's asatru, there's vanatru, there's rokatru, and then thursatru, which are the different kinds of gods, and kind of like the different ways of labeling certain hearth cults around those things. And I personally follow deities that fall under Aesir, Vanir, and Rokatru, and the Rok. But I just consider myself heathen. As far as Jotun are concerned, it's not my deal, but it's no judgment if it is your deal. My experience with people that are into Thursatru is, it's hard to be Thursatru because there's less information on the Jotun than there are on like the Aesir or the Vanir. And I'd say there's more information actually on the Jotun than there are on the Vanir, with the exception of the ones that were traded to the Aesir. So, if you're going to get into, so Vanatru is especially challenging, but that tends to manifest as more of like a following of nature spirits. With Thursatru, though, it's a following of the primordial chaos and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't have a lot of experience with that as far as like how it's manifest in practice. But what I've seen of it seems really neat. It's a different approach because you're doing something that from a recon perspective is kind of frowned upon, which is embracing chaos deities.
Yeah, that can turn messy very quickly depending on who you're working with.
But there's recon justifications for it too. There's a king, for example, that devoted himself to Utgarloki in I think Saxo's History of the Danes, that is mentioned. It's frowned upon in there too, but then again, so is the worship of Odin. So there's a lot of ways to look at it.
Yeah, it's again, it's kind of further adding to the idea of it's very hard to believe the gods are all good with the just sheer number of them that were considered not to be.
There is actually there's a character in I've been reading through Saxo Grammaticus recently, so I'm wanting to rant on him a lot. There to give a bone to Thursatru, there's a story in book 1 actually. Hadding has a relationship with an ice giantess who's a Jotun, who is very protective of him and actually sacrifices herself for him. So that's evidence to say that the Jotun, human relationships with the Jotun would be historical and even profitable, so to speak. I don't know, like a good thing. So it's not something that's necessarily horrible. It's just from the heathen perspective, it's just something that's different, I think.
Yeah, I think that with Eris, like in terms of historical stuff, even Discordia, which is the Roman name given to, like, when they syncretized, that's the name that she was given, wasn't necessarily viewed in the best light. I think with Eris, the part of the problem again is that we don't have a ton of attestations for her, and the ones we have are largely negative. And I can't find any evidence of a cult to her. So from like the perspective of somebody who's reconstructing, unless you like come from a Platonic framework and are looking at it purely as the gods are all good, I can't see a reason why you'd want to interact with her. But if you feel called to her and you have a positive relationship with her, again, that's your praxis. That's valid. I'm not going to take that away from you. It's just you at your own risk as far as I'm concerned. For
the Jotun, there's a few stories of individuals in Viking sagas of people following Jotun. There's also stories of Viking sagas of people following Aesir that are painted in a horrible light, and that's part of that is the Christian authorship.
Yeah, you guys have a major Christian problem with most of your your so-called primary sources, or at least the closest thing you have to them.
Absolutely. In the saga of Hrolf Kraki, for example, the one of the kings that is a devotee of Freyr is depicted as a devil worshipper. And he's the main antagonist of the story. And anywho, I'll probably get into some of that in a video, but because this is
you've been saying you're going to be doing more heathen stuff.
Yeah, I want to get into some more heathen stuff soon, because like that's a big deal. I think is getting into some of the legends and how to interpret them, how to understand them, and that kind of how to read them, because how to read them is important, I think.
Yeah, I've got a video coming on down the line, which I kind of allude to in this week's script, where I'm going to be talking about how to read literature like in ancient Greek, because there's a mindset you kind of have to take when you're looking at ancient myth. You can't necessarily bring as much of the modern perspective to it, otherwise you might miss a lot of what was meant, in the culture at the time. Right.
And so to piggyback on that, it was the Thursatru thing. There's evidence in Jomsvikings. There's evidence in Saxo Grammaticus of worship of Jotun that are painted in different lights. Like Hadding's relationship with the Jotun, again, is very individualistic. It's not a cult of. The Jotun reached out to him individually, and that's that might be something to suggest that maybe the same thing translates to Discordia, where it's not a cult of, but an individual's relationship with, and that's one way to approach it in a way that's valid or whatever, or reconstruction. You can make that work from a reconstruction perspective, I think.
Well, particularly,
that's definitely
we don't know if she honors Cadiz or not. It's just you're kind of gambling on that, whether or not she will honor Cadiz individually.
I would say so, because if you don't have, and like this, the problem gets bigger with heathenry. If you don't have like something direct, especially in something that has such a wealth of documentation like Hellenism does, then that problem comes up, right? Because you have evidence that should be there that isn't. Why isn't that evidence there? What happened? These are all good questions from a recon perspective.
Well, yeah, and it's like, especially because within Hellenism, we have almost a completely different problem, which is the wealth of documentation leads to questions like what I have for my Patreon bonus video this month, which is when the myths contradict each other, what do?
Right.
Because we have myths from all over Hellas, which was not a united place. It was a bunch of individual feuding, warring city-states that kind of pseudo-united a little bit because of the Peloponnesian War, and then kind of absolutely got united under Roman rule. But is Greek and Roman, are the deities the same? I personally don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
They're radically different sets of praxis at the very least, which I had a question about that. How do my beliefs interact with the Romans taking the understanding, interpretatio Graeca is what that's called, rebranding and tweaking the Greek gods? I think that the Roman gods are separate. Personally, I'm a hard polytheist. I think that those are different entities. I think they took a lot of the same stories, but I don't think that those are the same gods. So my beliefs are, I don't tend to interact with the Roman deities basically at all. But I do my best to reconstruct from classical period Athens to archaic period Athens and Ionia. I like add bits and pieces of Ionian stuff because I'm a big fan of Hesiod. But for the most part, I do my best to stay out of the Hellenistic period because of the fact that things get really muddy. So let's see. Jen, it's Xenia Bridge early. Oh, hey, Jen. Let's see. I asked this before, you weren't paying attention. Are there any books you can get to support me? Actually, if you go and you look up my author name, I can link my Amazon profile in the live chat if you're interested. But yeah, actually, I have 2 novels out. Neither of them are all that expensive in ebook form. They're one of them is a little more expensive in paperback. But if you're interested in helping support me, that would be useful. Unless you're talking about research, in which case, in the description, my research material wish list is there. And if you click on that Amazon wish list and you pick a book from there, it'll send it to my house if you select that. Hello, Carpathia. Let's see. Ocean, you are muted.
Yeah, I didn't want to have chances with steppage. My ADD will just start talking.
Well, I did that to you, and I apologized.
No. Your show. I just. Somebody asked me a question in the chat a while ago about Celtic heathenry and if it's a thing.
Oh, blood, sweat, and steel. Blood, sweat, and steel.
Yeah. So is it
go.
possible to honor the Celtic goddesses as a heathen, or is that a hearth cult thing? And the answer is yes in both. So the line between Celt and heathen or Germanic is a river. It's the Rhine. Historically, that was the dividing line between what is Gaul and what is Germania, was the Rhine River, and that was a label that was assigned by the Romans, and that's it. So culturally, there is a gradient there. So trying to say this is Celtic and this is Germanic, or this is heathen and this is Celtic, when you look at the extremes, like when you look at island Celt polytheism and Scandinavian heathenry, you're going to find a huge amount of differences. But when you get onto continental and you see one tribe that is Celtic on one side of the Rhine and then another tribe that is Germanic on the other side of the Rhine, the differences get they're not as pronounced as they would be in the previous example.
Well, and also there's even more of a problem of, how the fuck do we find sources when it comes to Celtic Reconstructionism anyway?
Oh, of course. Yeah, if you're a continental heathen or you're a continental Celt, the challenge just went up significantly. Like, say if you're, and these exist, if you're like a Frankish heathen, or if you're a Lombardian heathen, or Langobarд, or if you get into like things that are really specific on continental heathenry, and you're not just continental heathenry, but you're like a specific tribe, like Macromani or something like that, then yeah, you're gonna wind up being like, my hands are tied by the lack of historical sources that are available, but there are some on all of these tribes. Like there's a surviving legend from the Langobards. There's records on the Makramani. There are records that exist on the Swabi. These are all like Germanic tribes pre-1000 that there are Roman records of that you can read.
That's a really good point, Felipe. Yeah, cultures and religions don't separate neatly. That's just how humans work.
Correct.
You know, people adopt bits and pieces of belief. Like, we even function this way in the modern day. Like, I grew up across 3 cultures, technically, and there are bits and pieces of all of them that are part of my makeup as a human being. Like, this is something that runs into frustration quite often for me, because the Haida parts don't always get along with the rest of it. But like, if that works that way with individuals, like cultures interacting, of course there's going to be an even larger amount of exchange when you're not dealing directly with colonialism. Let's see. Griffin, honestly, it would probably be more helpful for me if you wanted to check out my pen name. Comrade, you misspelled the name a little bit. It's Leigh, the British feminine spelling, Ashleigh, Gouch, Gauch. If you look that up, Covenant of the Hollow and Diary of the Hollow are 2 of my novels that you can check out. But it actually might even be more helpful if you want to check out my research material wish list and pick some stuff up off of there, because those books get expensive really fast. When I say that when I talk about my freaking Patreon money and I say, hey, it's for research, like, because I want to actually get these books, I'm not kidding lying about the expense.
It's not lying. You look at this, that's mostly research books.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, it gets expensive. I have chosen a fairly expensive hobby/religion.
Mm-hmm. And especially if you're trying to make sure that you have accurate information and you're not just going to go buy, like, Greek mythology book or, Norse mythology book off the shelf that, you don't necessarily know who frickin' wrote it. Like, if you want the good scholarly shit, you're looking at upwards of $100 to $200 a book in some cases. Go ahead. Sorry, you were ranting.
No, I'm done. It's just like, it's expensive. There's horns there now, though.
Yeah, you have awesome drinking horns.
I like them.
One might say Ocean is very horny.
I did get a comment in the comment section saying, all right, it was like the time code when I pull out the horns and it said Ocean's horny on Maine. And I was like, that's fun. I hate you.
By the way, for those of you who are fans of mine who are watching this, and you want to do some prep work for this week's video, I'm going to be referencing Ocean's video fairly heavily toward the middle of this week's video, because his Euthyphro Dilemma video kind of inspired almost halfway between an obsession and just a very, like, interesting thought train in me, because I started looking at the Greek and I started looking at the concept of hosios, which it's translated as piety, but it's a bit more complicated than that, because of course it is. It's fucking Greek. Greek is an incredibly complicated language. And, like, if you guys go check that video out, it'll give you kind of some prep as to why that might have been for me, and also kind of where I'm going to be building off of the work that he did in that video, because he's given me permission to use some clips from his video in mine to kind of expand on the work that he did there.
It's fair use. Allie can steal them anyway, but I did say she could.
Yes.
How about I say you can't anymore? What are you going to do now?
Now I'm going to demand that you create an actual original video spot, because reasons.
Oh, damn it. That's right. You can use the clips.
That's what I thought.
Oh wait, what did Jake
has questions? He said, you stay out of the Hellenistic period as a Hellenist. There's a difference between a name and an era. That's interesting. So here's the thing. The Hellenistic period is specifically like this period of Roman, Greek, and Egyptian syncretism that existed for about, I want to say 200 to 400 years or so. That period is different than just saying Hellenist, which comes from the word Hellene, which is like the Greek term for a Greek person or a citizen of Greece, which derives from the term Hellas, which was the term for Greece. It again, not really a country, but like all of the different people of the Greek city-state would consider themselves Hellenes, or, people of Hellas, united kind of by culture and mythology, at least also, bits and pieces of it.
Jake, I dig the hypercube.
Yeah, hypercube's awesome. Anything exists, Greeks. Well, let's make it complicated. That's basically the way it is. The Greek language is languages, plural. There are multiple Greek languages. You can't just learn modern Greek and expect to be able to read lots of stuff, which you already know because you speak some of modern Greek. But like, yeah, all of Greek, anything is complicated, and there's a lot of having to navigate and figure out what you're going to incorporate, what you think is religion versus culture. Like Ocean and I even had an interesting discussion earlier on miasma and whether or not miasma was religious, like commandment or culture. Like, how do you figure that out?
My favorite way to troll Allie is Allie will send me this long thing, and I'll respond, "It's all Greek to me."
Or you'll respond with bar.
Yeah, like, exactly. I'll just say bar back, like a paragraph of bar, and then Allie gets mad at me. So,
I mean, I'm not mad at you unless I'm British. I get irritated with you. Like, I don't think I've ever actually.
No, you don't get mad. Like, yeah, no, it's like Allie doesn't get like it. That doesn't happen. But yeah, no, I'll troll you, and then the desired effect of my trolling happens.
So Comrade brings up a good point. Comrade is a Hellenistic polytheist because they syncretize Roman, Hellenic, and Kemetic praxis, like what happened during the era, versus I am a Hellenist because I worship Hellenic deities. Like Hellenist and Hellenistic, as much as people like to use them, there's actually proper usages for those. But again, that's like
it's all Greek to me.
Yes, Gotham Girl, the grammar alone is absolutely a fucking nightmare. Like, don't get me started on case endings. I've already annoyed people ranting about that before. Let's see. What are y'all's thoughts on polytheists who aren't reconstructionists, like the ones who give offering in the ways that don't necessarily line up with historical ways of doing so?
I think we're different on this. Or we might be. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't really have an opinion on that. It's their path. It's entirely up to them whether they want to blaze it or not. I personally feel more in line with the historical reconstructionist perspective. Like, that's the path that I was kind of led to in terms of my experiences with the gods. But I think it's perfectly valid to worship them in other ways. Again, I think that there's care that needs to be given in doing so for certain kinds of deities. Like, again, if you were to approach the Haida deities in a non-traditional way, that might be dangerous for you. It's entirely up to you what you do.
Your path is valid as long as you're not harming yourself or others or using revisionism, bad philosophy, or pseudoscience.
And as long as you're not trying to claim it's the only way.
Yeah, and also if you're not correcting me. Like, that's the thing. If you're trying to tell me I'm wrong, then that changes the dynamic of the conversation. The other, like, again, to reiterate what I just said is, you know, if you're harming yourself, if you're harming others, or if you are using bad philosophy, revisionism, or pseudoscience, those are like really the kind of the 5 issues that where I'm going to take some issue. Otherwise, eclecticism is fucking valid. And those standards apply to recon too, because recons get into those things too.
Recons have a reputation for being bossy and stuffy. And like you helped draw my attention to that. I didn't have as much interaction with that part of the recon community.
Recons are annoying.
Because my first exposure to other recons was actually Hellenian. And Hellenian's very accepting of eclecticism. There's a lot of problems with that organization, but that's not one of them. Versus like what you talked about with your experiences early on with the heathen community. Like, that's I can't even imagine.
So it's like baby heathen popping around. And one of the things that you bump into are people who've read a lot of books, but they don't tell you where to find them, kind of shit. People that are really
come back
really
when you've read the books that I won't tell you what they are.
Yeah, and that's like a thing. It's like, you know, I have the opposite attitude on this. There's a lot of recons out there. I find this to be fairly common, that are like, I had to hunt for these resources, so you have to do it too. And for me, it's like,
why?
I had to hunt for these resources, so I want to make them available to you so you don't have to go through the years of bullshit that I had to go through with a history degree to find the good starting points. Like, then, and I think that the general response of I went through hell, so you have to go through hell, is part of what inspires a lot of revisionism, because then people who don't know what they're looking for fortunately, I had the degree to help me figure out what the appropriate sources are and how to read them, which again, that's another thing.
Stop trolling me. Fuck conjugating anai. This is all I have to say. Anai is not a good thing in the least. There is nothing noble or beautiful about it. Fuck conjugation of anai.
But yeah, the long and short of it, that's like an issue that I've got generally reconstructionism. So my goal basically is like, hey, here are sources for you to be able to read, and how to read them is something we can talk about after you've started kind of thumbing through them a little bit. So yeah, I'm all about accessibility. Whereas I find that some people are it's not a secret knowledge tradition because you can find everything in books, but what the books are seems to be secret knowledge sometimes.
Well, and that's really silly, but also I want to piggyback off of that and mention that, especially when it comes to Greek recon, like a lot of our resources are prohibitively expensive. Like we were talking about earlier when I was mentioning, hey, literally all of the, $200-$300 I get every month out of Patreon goes straight into my fucking books, like for my channel. Like, I don't think that you should have to be middle class, upper middle class, or freaking rich in order to access a religious tradition. If you feel a call from the gods, I think you should absolutely be able to access the information you need. And that's part of the reason why I'm basically crowdfunding recon with my channel. Like, that's part of the reason why my Patreon even freaking exists, is I want to be able to like bring that knowledge to people, because some people say might be dyslexic and have an easier time listening to a video than trying to dig through an incredibly dense scholarly book. Some people might have the level of education they would need to deal with the layers upon layers of footnotes and argumentations that happen between scholars and figure out which particular path they're going to take, like within, say, the debates about what the Homeric afterlife looked like. There were 5 different books that I referenced there, and all of them had different views on it, and I had to kind of synthesize those things. That's not to say that people who want to do that work shouldn't. In fact, my videos can be a jumping off point for people who want to go deeper. But if you don't want to, like, or if you don't have the ability or the money to, I want to make sure that you can have something. You know what I mean?
And it's fucking admirable. And yeah, like accessibility, increasing accessibility, anything you can do to do that as a heathen or a Hellenist or really of any path, it's going to be a positive thing, honestly, as long as you got the right, approach to it, to be able to, like, there's a historically valid approach to get recon sources together, and there's an approach that isn't valid. And I've, for example, Jesus mythicism is something that pops up a lot. There are scholars that approach that in a very valid way. I would say that Price is one of those people. And then there are people that don't approach it in a way that is historically valid, that still wind up getting talked about, because some people are like, your conclusion aligns with my agenda, so I'm going to propagate your work. And one of those people is a guy named Atwood, that basically put out like this conspiracy theory concept of Jesus mythicism, that Jesus was created by the Roman Empire in order to control people. And the person who researched that used horrible methods. Turns out that, and they talk about how he's like got a master's and all that shit. It's in computer programming, and it doesn't follow, like, his methodology is shit. So, I think it's called Caesar's Christ or some shit like that. I can't remember the name of the damn book, but it's
well, and that's another important thing, is like learning how to vet your sources is a fucking skill. Like, and it's a skill that not everybody has the time to put together. Some people
do, or because I can look at it at a glance. I think you can too. And you go, oh, okay. But most people can't do that. Most people
this
don't
publisher,
have,
okay, like this publisher, this name, etc. Like I can probably, I can give you a list of names that are reputable scholars, that it's really like reputable scholars that, like, if their name is on a book, chances are they probably got a good take. Like Robert Parker is one of them, Walter Burkere, Christian Servant
people that are vetted.
Yeah. And like you can kind of give those people as a starting point. But like, for example, the book on Hosios is written by a person named Saskia Peels. Well, what makes that valid? Well, for one thing, it's part of the Brill collection, and that publisher is a good publisher of Hellenic content. It's like the particular, it's got footnotes and such in it, and it actually cites all of its sources. It's got the original Greek. There are things that you can, when examining a book, if you know what you're looking for, you can tell it's a good source. But sometimes it's harder to tell if you don't already have that skill. And again, you might want to honor the old gods, but you may not have the time to do the sheer volume of homework that, say, Ocean and I are doing for our videos to try to make this stuff more accessible. And that's okay. That's valid. And I don't think people should gatekeep on somebody's ability to do mass amounts of research versus enough to understand what it is they're doing properly.
One thing that I've been trying to do, especially with a lot of my recent videos, is put out concepts on being pagan as well as the philosophy behind polytheism that took me a long time to get my head to wrap around. And I'm trying to make those as accessible as possible. And I want to get more into specifics after that, but I want to run through a lot of the basics first. And I think that like I've gotten a little bit to that point where a lot of like those base ideas are on my channel that culminated essentially with my VPG video, which you were involved in. And now I'm wanting to move into making heathenry more accessible, because that's something that it's not commonly...
Ocean stage 1, polytheism is actually valid. Stop making fun of us. Ocean stage 2. Okay, now I get to talk about my faith.
It's like, okay, we can have, all right, cool. Now that we've established that, and now that that's something that any other polytheist YouTuber can now stand on, right?
Like Latent Christianity, especially as a video, gets referenced constantly in this community and the atheist community.
And yeah, and then the UPG, VPG, SPG, VPG video, I think a lot of polytheists can stand on. So now we get into specifics of like heathenry and that kind of stuff, which is going to be fun, I think.
Yeah, I'm doing a little bit of that sort of work too. Do pagans worship demons is one of those. Why is pride a sin is another one, kind of looking at these Christian attitudes that we carry with us. And is Zeus a predator, which kind of goes into looking at things through cultural eyes and understanding cultural context and such, which when I do my how to read mythology like an ancient Greek, I'm going to build a lot on the ideas on that. But I think that your channel has been one of the like best contributions to that particular area of pagan thought, where it's accessible, people can understand the arguments fairly easily, and it helps them defend themselves both against anti-theists and against Christians who are trying to convert them or trying to invalidate their beliefs, which when you're a fledgling pagan, that can be like, it's very lonely.
One thing that I've also gotten a response from is from atheists who watch it and they go, oh, okay, that's reasonable. And then they stop fucking with us. And it's like, okay, cool. All right. That's in part the goal. It's like, okay, now I understand what you're doing and that doesn't bother me. And it's a way it achieves that effect, honestly. And cool. And now it's like, okay, no one's going to be going after you, or at least people that understand this aren't going to be going after you for this dumb reason. It might be another dumb reason, but it's not going to be that dumb reason. So
yeah, and that's really what both the demons and the divine inspiration video were about. Like the claim to biblical divine inspiration, which then was said to grant infallibility, is one of those things that Christians just love to attack us about. Like, oh, well, your mythology came from fuck tons of authors over a huge amount of history. How do you know that any of it's true? Well, like, we don't, because the gods can lie and so can yours. But we actually have a good question from Griffin here. To both of you, what was your first interactions with fluff bunnies and what made you see them as harmful? I'll let you go first.
The secret.
Oh my God, yes. Though mine was actually the precursor. Mine was the precursor to The Secret. Shakti Gawain's creative visualization was my first exposure, and freaking Silver Raven Wolf. So what made me see Silver Raven Wolf as harmful, I talked about this a little bit in one of my videos with Jen Aldrich on the Divinity Bridge, one of my live shows. Freaking Silver Raven Wolf has a spell that she claims will protect you from abusive parents and from people going through your locker room if you're trying to hide things that you're not supposed to, which can translate to anything from like drugs to contraband, etc. So like there's that sort of false promise of protection and things of that nature. But there's also, I've seen a lot of people in my life, including some family members, that think things like freaking essential oils can cure cancer and stuff like that. And like that sort of fluffy bunny bullshit, that actually does hurt people. We talk about that regularly over on Zany Bridge. Like that, you can clearly see the harm in it. And I've only seen more fluffy bunnery as time has gone on. Like, I don't think that all of fluffy bunnery is directly harmful, but I think that a lot of the attitudes that go into accepting revisionist history as the basis for your praxis can be. So that's kind of where my stance is on fluffy bunnery. There's also sort of, with things like the secret and creative visualization, there's this kind of inherent implication that if you're not getting all the things in your life, it's because of something you did. It's because you're not visualizing hard enough. You're not trying hard enough. You know, if the spell didn't work, you must have done something wrong. You know, if your parents are still hurting you, in the case of the anti-abuse spell, you must not have believed enough. And when you start to get into really serious shit like that, like that's where fluffy bunnery goes from just being annoying to being outright dangerous. Thoughts on the it jumped again. Frick. There was one that was it was Heracles. Thoughts on the Indo-Greeks who syncretized Hellenism with Buddhism, where Heracles was interpreted of the guardian of the Buddha, as well as Buddhism more generally. Buddhism as a general concept is pretty chill. It's interesting. I think that there's a bit of hell-like belief in the idea that one's soul just reincarnates through eternity into misery if you don't find enlightenment. I think that can be a bit coercive. But apart from that, I think most of the praxis that comes out of Buddhism is actually really healthy. And it also, again, depends on which Buddhism you're talking about. There's Buddhism that includes a pseudo sort of deity worship in the term of the bodhisattvas. There's Buddhism that is exclusively just like based off of the Eightfold Path. So the answer is, I don't know what I think of it, apart from I think there's a lot of praxis that came out of it that's very, very healthy for people. As for the Indo-Greeks, that's not something I've researched too much in depth yet. Is Seattle still smoky from all the West Coast fires?
What? You haven't researched Bactria to its completion?
Not yet. I am working
thoroughly. Damn it.
Not... I am working on.
You need to know everything about every single successor kingdom. This is something
God.
that has to happen right now. Like, why aren't you doing?
Now?
No, sit down.
I'm gonna go get back
to read a complete history of Bactria immediately.
So what you're saying is I need to get on Crusader Kings 3 and just create my own alternative history. That's what I need to do.
Correct. And you need to live stream it. Actually, people would watch the fuck out of that.
You know what the funny thing is that I've been playing Crusader Kings 3 on my Discord server at night for the last couple of nights because I picked it up and am now completely addicted to it because I'm stupid and really
I told you
what I'm doing.
That if you play Total War Troy, people would eat that up, right? Like that's and I even showed you. I showed Allie half to troll her and half because I'm legitimately interested how she would play this game. How to play as Aeneas in Total War Troy. And I deliberately chose Aeneas because
of Goddess and Hellenism into the game, which I find really interesting.
Yeah. I figured when I saw the instructions to it, I was like, Allie will either love this or she'll rant about it for 3 hours.
You sent me that link taking that risk.
I did. I took that risk, and I didn't hear a whole lot from you about it afterwards. But so I feel like I failed. But
I was very interested in it. But here's the thing.
But you need to play the game almost.
Yeah, I do. But I have a very similar position to you, though, when it comes to pop culture portrayals of the gods, and that's that. Right. I think it's ultimately a positive thing. Yeah, and the fact that they even integrated a system like that of religion into the game, I think is a positive progress. I think that is freaking awesome. Even if they might have oversimplified things, that's still more than not having that in the game. You know what I mean? As for whether or not Seattle is still smoky from all the West Coast fires, it is, but the rain over the last few days has cleared a lot of it out of the air and put it into the ground instead. So we've had some acid rain going on, not obviously enough to like burn you, but we've had some of it. It's gonna, for any of you that are in the West Coast that have like soil beds, you might want to till some lime or bone meal into your soil fairly soon because your soil is going to be very stripped of calcium because of the rain that we've been getting. But it's a lot better. I can actually breathe better.
Fucking Allie and random facts. Like, you're a keeper of odd knowledge.
You've seen my garden, Ocean.
No,
directly.
I know.
I've shown you videos of it.
I keep forgetting because that's like a lot of where your education background is too, is in nutrition. So, and that follows into an understanding of gardening, I guess, that you've applied a lot of that knowledge to. So that makes a lot of sense. But it's still just kind of like even though I know where it comes from, it's still like conks me upside the head whenever it's like, wait, Allie, like, knows a bunch of stuff about that. And you keep doing that. It's like, damn, all right.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying to find another question. I'm seeing a lot of Greek.
I'm not.
Well, that's because you can't read. You wouldn't know if it's Greek or not. It's all just like scrambling itself on the page for you, and I have to read it for you.
I see my
name. Jake says his brother had the secret. The secret is one of the most harmful things I think that has come out of pseudoscience in terms of people's self-esteem. And yes, self-esteem and like emotional shit does physiologically change you. Like neuroplasticity, if you don't believe that, look it up. Like what we think about ourselves and what we do in the world changes the way our brain is wired physiologically. Like this is just a thing. Taxi drivers in New York have larger visual cortexes and more developed visual cortexes than like the average layperson. People who study languages have more developed linguistic centers. This is just a thing that happens. If you hate yourself, it decreases blood flow to certain parts of your brain and actually can limit how many connections your brain can make properly. That's why depression, if it goes untreated for a long time, neurologically can cause brain damage. Like that stuff does matter. Anyway, sorry, rambling. Without a direct topic, I will do that.
That's what happens.
Let's see. Who would win in a fight, Amaterasu or Shiva? I mean, it depends on what Hindu perspective you're looking at.
Questions about the gods fighting bore me to fucking tears. Tell you what.
They are.
Yep.
Don't apologize about the Greek Gotham girl. I thought you were going to bed a little bit ago. I hope that you rest well when you do. Let's see. Oh no, The Secret fucked with me for a long time. I thought the universe hated me because it didn't work. Yeah, that's the kind of results you can get from pseudoscientific woo like that. Like that's a part of the problem that I have with a lot of Wiccan books as well, because Wicca draws heavily, at least with a lot of Llewellyn publications. One of these days I'm gonna do an angry video on Llewellyn, because Llewellyn is a whole hot fucking mess. But a lot of Llewellyn publications draw heavily on The Secret, and a lot of modern theories about the way that magic works draw heavily on it as well.
You taught me this actually about Llewellyn. I didn't realize this was it was a publisher issue.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a popularity of thought issue, but no, it's a publisher issue. Like the wealth of books is directly connected to a single publisher that is proliferating, and I'm like.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's what's going. Okay, now
and they cross-reference
there was like a
each
giant
other
click
too.
For me. Yeah, exactly. You're saying they all use each other as sources and that kind of stuff. It's like within one publisher, and it's like, God damn, that is a dynamic that I didn't realize was a thing, and that they've got like a clientele on lock, that kind of shit. And it's like, oh, I didn't notice that, but as soon as you pointed it out, I was like, that makes a ton of fucking sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, you saw that giant-ass shelf of books that I was giving away for a little while. Like, if you look at the spines of the majority of them, almost all of the fluffy bunnery stuff came from Llewellyn. Like, there are other smaller publishers that are a lot better at vetting their authors, but Llewellyn will take pretty much anything from anybody if they think they can sell it. And, like, when you're talking about references for religious stuff, that can be extremely dangerous. Like, you can end up with some really, really unhealthy stuff.
Right.
Like... I know there are some people.
If you don't have any quality control and you're just spamming, which is what some publishers do, you know. There you go.
This is true. This is absolutely truth, Joan, and just because it's truth doesn't mean I don't resent it. It wouldn't be an Aliakai stream with Ocean in it without rambles either, because like the two of us are both going to go off.
We both do it. Like we both have attention deficit OS. Which is Squirrel, or Shiny, or whatever, and it's like, you know, we'll chase down the rabbits, and some of them are holding clocks, and then they go down. We were in Wonderland, and we don't know what's going on, and we're still talking to each other about what we think is a relevant topic, which is nowhere near where we started. It's a bad habit that we both have, but. What it winds up in us doing is going down research holes like that. Like research rabbit holes are a thing.
And occasionally we drag each other into each other's research holes.
Right. And anybody who has, first it was mispronouncing And now it's the I don't know. I can't read, so damn if I pronounce things right. But
I'm pretty sure it's pronounced like Uwelm or something like that, but meh. I mean, I'm gonna say it the way that it like is spelled because I don't actually speak that language. If somebody can give me the correct pronunciation, I can do some effort in the future. But like Llewellyn is the way that it looks, so sorry.
Research holes. Oh yeah, that is bad phrasing, isn't it? But anyway, whatever. So
sometimes they are warm and wet, sometimes they are cold and dry, and sometimes they are windy.
Help. Okay, anyway.
You got into a stream with me willingly, I might add.
Into each other's research holes. Yeah, okay, this isn't sounding good the more you think about it. But we'll do that to each other. And it just gets worse and worse. But it also makes it suddenly a video comes out of it.
Mm-hmm. Like, or multiple videos, or at the very least, a very interesting and productive discussion. Ocean and I have ended up staying up upwards of 5 hours talking to each other about each other's research rabbit holes that we have fallen down for no particular reason.
I give a specific example of me and you staying up too late to get a specific term right.
Folkism.
We stayed up. It was multiple days, y'all, going back and forth on the definition of folkism, trying to figure out a good one that works for what we're trying to suggest or like talk about, right? Identify as to what they do. That is the thing that makes the label focused applicable. And because there's a thing that people call focused, but if you can't describe what it is that is the standard for what they're doing, what's the usefulness of the term? So
it's kind of like porn. I know it when I see it, but that's only so useful until you're dealing with something that is potentially damaging, or folks who try to argue, well, I'm not focused because I'm not going to refuse to worship with a black person. I just think they can't get as close to the gods as I do.
People try to weasel out of it on a basis of a technicality. I'm like, all right, well, let's make a technicality. Right. And the definition that we have, I think, is extremely functional. I don't think that it's difficult to weasel out of, if possible. I think that once you're not doing what that definition is, you're not really a folkist anymore. You're just tolerant.
Well, and it also helped us with dealing with the arguments about, well, you guys are universalists. No, I think there's a standard of praxis that you have to have in order to be a Hellenist.
I think there's focused and not focused. This tribalist universalist bullshit. No, there is focused, and then there's not focused.
Well, plus the definition of universalist isn't even useful. Like, universalist is what? Anybody can call themselves this. So an atheist could call themselves a Hellenist because they feel like it. Like, that's not, and that's exactly
dumb, obviously.
No.
I think that it's something that that the universalist, tribalist, focused paradigm, that structure. First, it's not a true trichotomy, because there isn't a division of not, right? There's just 3 different labels, and somebody has to look at it and go, oh, I'm picking one of these, right? No, bullshit. There is folkism. There's a thing that it does, and there's people that are that and are not that. This tribalism, universalism thing, it just is an ability to be able to straw man somebody into a position. Like to say, oh, no, I'm a universalist. Oh, well, that means that you think that an atheist can be a heathen, or that a Christian can be a Hellenist. And it's like, no, that's stupid, right? Oh, yeah, that's why universalism is stupid. That's why I'm a focus. No, fuck off.
I mean, if I really wanted to be an asshole, I could say that most Christians today would qualify under that, because most of them are in fact Platonists, and Plato was a polytheist, and also the Trinity is incoherent. But that would be me being an asshole, and I'm not going to be.
Cussing on your stream like crazy. I'm sorry, but...
I don't give a fuck. Like, okay, the chances of any of my live streams ever getting monetized, like in all of the history of anything, are just basically 0 because Jen. I mean, we have F-bomb counters for a reason.
Okay, now, okay, yeah, I agree with you.
I don't expect to monetize my live streams. I'm hoping to monetize my videos, because I do my best to avoid YouTube's like incredibly puritanical guidelines in my videos. There's a few of them that I don't think are going to be, the anti-theism video and the folkism one, both being the case.
Right.
But most of my stuff, I'm hoping, like, it's educational. There's no real reason. I avoid nudity, and I tend to block it out like when I can. So I don't have any thoughts on pre-Islamic Arabian polytheism because I know literally nothing about it at all. I'm glad I made you groan, Carpathia. That is the warm wet hole joke is a joke I told Carpathia quite a while back.
Oh no.
Let's see. There was one.
There's a friend of mine where he and I dived a little bit into pre-Islamic Arabian polytheism as well as Zoroastrianism.
That sounds like a very dirty rabbit hole, comrade. Don't fall down that one.
International. Oh boy. You know, there's a series of articles actually about a piece of fossilized Viking poop. That is
what?
Another yes.
There's a Viking corporalite.
There is some fossil. I prefer fossilized Viking poop. I think that's the correct term to use. Fossilized Viking poop. I want to say that a lot. And what happened was with it is that they, you do an analysis of the poop and you find all the elements of the poop that wound up giving you a lot of information about how people lived in that period of time. Now, what kind of deductions you can make about a single Viking's excrement that he put out somewhere is dubious, but it did show that the person who made this particular log was somebody who had like a lot of like digestion issues with parasites that were probably commonplace at the time, which means that like things that we would consider a bad day were probably a normal day in the Middle Ages. So yeah, if you're on the boat and you got the runs, it's there was probably, anyway, whatever. So I don't want to go into super large amounts of detail.
I mean, you could go blog about it.
Yeah, well, the Great Heathen Army was probably full of shit. Let's just put it that way. Like,
or maybe they weren't if you're talking about the runs.
Or maybe they were just not.
The great stink, that is the thing that scared away the enemies we now know.
The thing is, though, is that they had better grooming habits than the Englishmen, which makes you go, okay, so what kind of things were the Angles dealing with? Well, yeah.
So, polytheism is a very broad topic. Like, there are a couple of books that I could recommend. So I'll let you start, Ocean, because you have a few more, I guess, broad books when it comes to defining the gods and such that you can recommend. But as far as, like, I kind of would have to recommend stuff on Hellenism primarily, because generalized polytheism, TM, is wrought with plot holes and terrifying things.
I usually suggest 2 books if people want to start reading about polytheism.
TM.
Right. Because if you're getting into a specific tradition, there's a lot of other good entry points. But if you're looking at just the idea that there are multiple gods as opposed to, you're going to be interested in Stephen Dillon's book, who is a friend of mine. He wrote.
Yeah, that was the coolest thing when he came into the Discord server.
He's really chill. But Stephen Dillon's book is called A Case for Polytheism. He became a friend of mine after I read his book and promoted him on my channel. Somehow he found out and was actually a fan of my work. And then we bumped into each other and it was this wonderful, but anyway, A Case for Polytheism is a good text. There's things with it I disagree with. I don't agree with everything that Dillon says.
He goes pretty deep into like Hellenic sort of, he goes into Hellenic theology after he defines things a little bit and starts talking about ethics. And there are some things that even I disagree with in that section. So.
And it's like, the first like 3 chapters of the book, I want to say 3 or 4, are really cool and really accessible. The whole book is like 100 pages. So really accessible read. And, but the last half of the book is where I start to disagree with him a lot. For example, I think that he's a second horn guy rather than first horn. on
He
Youth of
is
Illinois?
second horn, and he has become more Platonist as time has gone on.
At
Like
least
the one
in that book, he is. Like, I don't. He can speak for himself, but because he says his views have evolved and he's gone more Neoplatonist. But anywho,
well, I mean, Neoplatonism espouses second horn stuff too. They think that morality comes from the gods, but they also don't think evil exists. They think that there are certain things which are good and divine, and by like worshiping the gods and interacting with them in that way, even though they are unmoved by us, we purify ourselves and become closer to what they are, and thereby naturally move toward goodness.
right. The other book that I'd mention, and one that I think is actually more thorough, is John Michael Greer's book, A World Full of Gods. I think that one...
Damn good book.
Yeah,
a lot more
good.
Personal, but damn good.
And I think that's part of the reason why it's good. If you want technical philosopher shit, read Dylan. If you want personal but still addressing a lot of concerns, read Greer's book. But it's also a broader addressing, I think, and it really gets into, like, Greer is like I think he's an Obad Druid, order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, and he a friend of mine knows him, but I haven't spoken to him before. But he's his book is like it goes into a lot of other angles and also talks about morality, talks about arguments for atheism and the polytheist response to them, talks about arguments for monotheism and the polytheist response to them. And he gets a little technical into it. I think he mentions Plantinga a couple of times in some of his arguments. So it's a good, again, those are two like general polytheism books that you can get into. Both of which I've mentioned on my channel as well on like How Do I Pagan? But if you're looking at getting into like a specific tradition, there's other intro books that are out there. I would suggest for
Hellenism, I can recommend Walter Bruckner's Greek Religion. That one, it is one of the most thorough explorations of historical Greek religion and goes into early Minoan Mycenaean theories and like the way that those interact. Bruckner is an excellent resource overall, but I wouldn't take it as gospel. Like that's your starting point within Hellenism. Also, Heracles, if you don't know what we're talking about, go watch Ocean's latest video.
This is the book I would suggest for getting an intro into heathenry. It's called The Practical Heathen's Guide to Asatru, which is written by Patricia M. something. I don't know how to spell her or say her last name. Anyway, so that's a book I would suggest. There's also another one if you're looking for something that's not as like religious, I guess. Here we go. It's this book. I'm going to take this out. Called The Viking Spirit by Daniel McCoy. It's very good. And it's written from a more historical perspective. This guy also runs a website called Norse Mythology for Smart People, which is very hubris, but it's a good website. You can get a lot of good information off of it.
As for like, we don't have near as many good Hellenism 101 books that are written from a modern practitioner's perspective. Like, I have problems with almost all of them. If you're looking for praxis, I highly recommend Labrus's book, even though the organization has problems. And you're going to hear me say this about literally all of the main Hellenist organizations, because we have a folkist problem, unfortunately. Like, we have problems with woo peddlers and folkists, and it sucks. Like, it's just don't join a Hellenic org if you can avoid it. But the Labrus book, Hellenic Polytheism, Household Worship, is the best pick up and practice book. It won't get you all of the theory that you need, but a lot of what would be missing from that book is actually already on my channel. Stuff about like miasma, and the Hosios book will talk about attitude toward worship, which I'm going to be working on fairly soon. But it is very much, it is a collection of rituals that will let you, and a calendar, a monthly calendar, that will let you just pick up and start practicing. And it's freaking wonderful. I do not recommend the Llewellyn Hellenismos book. It was written by a ceremonial magician. It's okay. I'm not a big fan of it. Chris Aldrich's Hellenism book it's got a lot of good information in it, but his weekly praxis that he has is very ahistorical. And I'm trying to think of the other major one. Komos and Cadiz, which were done by Sarah Kate Istra-Winter, have some extremely messy UPG stuff like god spousing and sexual service to the gods that are not only historical, but from a recon perspective are downright hubristic. in some ways. Like, again, your praxis is valid, but don't try to justify it with history. And Sarah tries to claim that there's history without actually citing any sources, which I have a major fucking problem with.
I'm gonna need to make a video on books, but someone asked about Celtic books. One that I would suggest is this one, Brief History on the Druids by Peter Beresford Ellis. It's one that I'm still working through myself, but it's a good source. Another one for getting into Celtic this is like, both of these are historical. You're not going to get into Celtic recon sources on recon.
Ocean has background in movies, by the way. Like, it is absolutely magic that he just pulled books off of his green screen.
Yeah, there you go. Like, it's a mess. But sorry. Anyway, Peter Beresford Ellis, as far as getting resources on Celtic recon, finding resources on Celtic practice as a recon is next to impossible because of the kind of things that are available. And these two books will start to show you about why that is. And anyway, this is The Druids, Brief History of by Peter Beresford Ellis. Another one here is this book called The Pagan Religions of the Ancient British Isles, Their Nature and Legacy by Ronald Hutton. And this is the first of many books that are written by Ronald Hutton. Ronald Hutton is a prolific author on Celtic polytheism that is a good starting place for you. There's also other authors such as Barry Cunliffe that is a Celt you would want to read from. He's published a lot through the Oxford Press. So
Oxford Press is another really good source.
Yeah. You want to check publishers.
Leb is a really good source for the classics, especially if you're learning ancient like languages. Leb will often put for example, with Greek, they will have Greek on the left page and the translation on the right with footnotes and notes throughout the translation to let you know why they chose specific words. There are also often like epigraphica at the end of them where like other authors who talked about this author, they will pull the quotes about that and they'll talk about it.
For Hutton publishes through Yale. There's another, like, you want to, again, keep in mind who you're reading, where they publish from, whether or not it's reputable, especially if you're reading for history.
Most university presses are good places to start.
Right.
Brill and Routledge are also very good places to start. And Brill, especially for their library on the classics. If you're looking at Hellenic or Roman stuff, they have massive collections. The books run upwards of $100 a piece, but they go very in-depth with very specific topics. Clarendon is another one that actually has some very decent stuff. The Servanu Inwood books that I have are Clarendon paperbacks. They're pretty decent. I'm trying to think of the other one, but Oxford, Harvard, and Routledge are basically like the best publishers, like generally for looking at classic stuff. John Michalson, Ancient Greek Religion. So Michalson has a lot of outdated opinions in his work, but it's a good place to start. I think that Michalson is fine, but not as a sole source. Same with Burkhardt. Like, both of them, you want to read a wide variety of authors on ancient Greek religion because, like, scholars, this is one of those things. Unlike with the Norse stuff, where, again, we have a very limited number of sources, with Greek, we have a fuckload. So what era, what city-state are we talking about? What does that researcher specialize in?
There's a lot of Norse sources as well, but not as much as the Greek. But then, damned if you're a Celt trying to find sources.
Mm-hmm.
The sources get, when you get into Celtic. But there are some that exist, like there's but if you want to, it depends on what you're looking for as well. If you want to find ancient legends, finding stuff on Celts is fairly easy in that regard. You can get a sense of ancient legends. If you're looking for practice, Norse, it's difficult, but you can get some stuff.
Well, we've even talked about
it's impossible. Good luck. Like finding things on particulars of Celtic ritual, you find scant descriptions in some places, and with heathenry, it's only a little bit more.
Well, and with heathenry, we've even talked about how heathens have borrowed things from other cultures that were adjacent, like prayer structures and stuff from Greeks, because there just isn't as much info.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about modern heathens, yes. Yes, they do.
Because like when you got to piece stuff together, if you don't have a ton of information, like that's again where we're spoiled, and it creates a different fucking problem on our side where it's like, okay, so what city state and what era are you reconstructing? That's why I'm so specific when I talk about, hey, classical era Athenians did this, but in the archaic period when Homer and Hesiod were writing, this is what was done as far as what we can tell from these texts. The reason that I'm so specific about that stuff in my videos is because of the dearth of sources we have. You're going to have a very different answer from a Hellenistic Greek than you would from a Homeric Greek. So we have what appears to be potentially kind of a troll-ish question from the great G-Man the Guy, which is, what biblical killings from God do you think are justified, if any? Absolutely fucking none of them, for the most part. Like, I don't believe in divine command theory, so if like you think a God told you to go kill somebody, my opinion is that you're wrong. I'm sorry if that's disappointing.
Falls under harmful praxis, I think.
How do you determine primary from secondary sources, and how do you determine credibility? We just talked about that at length, but primary sources... No. Well, credibility we talked about.
There's a whole thing.
So primary sources are your texts. These are your ancient Greek texts, and text here, generally, is defined as anything that communicates information. Images on pottery can be texts in terms of communicating stuff. Like that in academia, text means a lot more than it does when we're just talking as lay people. Like determining primary from secondary sources, Ocean's the one with a history degree, actually. You might be able to help with this a little better than I can.
Many of them are both. So here's a thing about, so what your primary source is a source that is written contemporarily and by what you're talking about, right? So let's go into a modern setting, for example, right? If there's an event that took place, an interview with somebody who was there will be your primary source, whereas a newspaper article about what happened that contains interviews from somebody who was there is a secondary source. However, if you are 300 years into the future and you want to find out what happened, that newspaper article that is a secondary source suddenly turns into a primary source because it's a contemporary source about what took place. Now,
you then get into all the messiness of like what was considered history in ancient times. There was a lot of things that like historians themselves even would talk about the difficulty of reconstructing accounts of things that happened from interviews and stuff and bias.
And it gets more complicated, right? Josephus, Josephus's text about the history of the Jews.
Oh, here we go.
Is a primary source. If you want to know what information was available to the Romans about that history. But Josephus's account would have been an amalgamation and is therefore in the time by the people reading it would have been a history that is therefore a secondary source to the Romans. Now, so this is how a source can be both at once. Now, to take that into the heathen or Hellenic perspective, if I want to read a saga, right? The saga is going to be a primary source about what Christian scribes recorded about heathen stories. If I want to have a primary source that is what heathens thought about heathen stories or the stories that heathens told from heathens.
Chicago is the redheaded bastard stepchild that nobody should have to love.
Then I lost my train of thought. Where'd I go? Oh, if you want a primary source on what heathens thought and heathen stories and from their perspective, that primary source doesn't exist. And only thing that's available is secondary sources, which are Christians writing about them. So, you know, the same source, depending on your context, can be one or the other. And with heathenry, all that we have available is that Christian lens. So, you know, you're stuck with...
Well, you also have a Greek
primary
lens.
Source, or, well, to a little bit. We also have a Roman lens to a little bit. Like Tacitus wrote Germania, right? But generally, if you want to talk about Norse heathenry, which means you're wanting to reconstruct a religion that's somewhere between the 800s and 1000s, then you're going to have Christian sources. That's it. You're going to have Saxa, you're going to have Snorri. And you're going to have the sagas, which are assorted Christian scribes.
Diogenes was a royal fuck. This is all I'm going to say on that. I'm actually starting to dig into the pre-Socratics a lot more. I've got some books on order from Leb to kind of dig a bit more into that, because most of the philosophy I've actually read is post-Plato, because like the split between Platonism and Stoicism from Socrates, like that's most of what I've studied. Honestly, is Plato, Neoplato. Like I've studied more Platonism than I've studied Stoicism, and that's really sad. But I'm just now starting to dig into the pre-Socratic, so I will give you an opinion when I've studied more. I completely agree with you, Aya.
I love Socrates.
Socrates.
Socrates is the correct pronunciation.
This right here is the reason why I cite in MLA, despite the fact that I am actually more accustomed to citing in APA because of my STEM background, because it's so much easier. So much easier. So we're actually getting up on a good 2 hours of having been in the stream. Do we have any more burning questions from the chat before we start kind of winding down for a little bit? Ocean, you're going to be on my channel in about 2 weeks. I just realized that.
No one told me.
Bull fucking shit. I arranged this shit with you at the beginning of the month.
Yeah, I said yes because like I have no clue what's happening then.
Well, you said yes because you were like, it'll give me a whole month to actually have a video to talk about.
Right. That's right. And then I took 2 weeks to make my next video, and it was just like a whole thing. So I've been trying to figure out this live on camera thing, guys. My microphone placement has been a nightmare just by itself. All right. Somebody talking in the comment section with somebody about that earlier today, where I was like, and then before I got on the stream, actually, I started thinking about it again. I was like, where do I put this fucking microphone? Because if I put it down here outside of the frame, I don't know. But if I put it here, you can hear me, you know, or if I put it here, or if I put it here, and I'm just like,
what do?
Just put it by the boobs. There we go. Okay, here we go.
But
Maybe.
but Ocean is too skinny.
I don't know.
Ocean doesn't have moves.
There's no boobage.
Comrade is entirely correct. Socrates is actually how you would pronounce it in the Homeric or Attic dialect. At least as far as I know from my own studies. For all I know, I'm terrible at life.
I fucked this up. Oh no, I'm gonna have to fix it. Now it's all crooked. Oh,
Good job, Ocean.
That's not good. Hold on a minute. Nope. Oh no.
Ocean has broken everything. The tech gremlins have struck everybody. It didn't hit my channel. They're just punishing Ocean by himself.
Oh no.
Ocean, because your RAM didn't actually get set on fire when you were burning your new computer, like the tech gremlins are displeased with you. Are you okay?
No, it's just you gotta understand. There we go. I fixed it. How I mounted this, okay? How I mounted this was with, if anybody is a film nerd, it's an offset arm with the grip head, and then that's clamping the mount for the scissor arm, and then that's going cross. I'm sure that like most people don't understand anything about what I said, but it's an offset arm attached to a C stand, which has a grip head on it that is gripping the base plate of the scissor arm, which is going to a shock mount, which is right here. So, and then that's holding the microphone. So there's just like a lot of like little things going on. And one of them, the grip head wound up going catawampus. So there we go. I fixed it. See, the mic is now standing straight up. But for a second there, it was dysfunctional.
You know, nope, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do horrible things to everybody's brains again. There's a very immature part of me that wanted to make a correlation between holes and mounting, but I'm not going to go there.
Nope.
Not at all. So, Ocean, I'm gonna get your link. Not that there's anybody here who hasn't fucking heard of you, like somehow on my channel, but I'm gonna get your link in the description because you showed up and hung out with me. Thank you so much for coming on for a little bit.
Gasp. I was happy to do it. It's like our channels have been like kind of growing together, which is really cool.
Yeah, like I honestly, I would like to be able to actually thank you on air, even though I've gushed at you 1.5 billion times over WhatsApp, and you could probably just scroll and pick a day and find me doing it. Like, thanking you publicly, like you have done more than probably anybody else, like for helping me grow my channel. Like you and Cirrus both. Like your shout out with the folkism video helped a ton with bringing people to the channel, and your support, and hell, even your support with like working together on scripts and stuff, and the fact that you've gone over, like when I had insecurities for like a month fucking straight, you were just like, you can't do this forever, but fine, I'll help. And I'm so incredibly grateful for that, because you helped me find my feet, and you were actually one of the people who helped keep me in the community in the first place to even have a channel, which, like, I didn't imagine that I'd hit 1,000 subs in a fucking, like, 4 fucking months, let alone, you know, even, I didn't imagine myself even sticking around after everything fell out. So I'm incredibly grateful to you, and you've been a, like, fantastic fucking friend. And you and Jen and Cirrus, I owe a massive gratitude to.
You are a wellspring of information that I want, you know, again, like my whole thing, I want things to be a little bit more accessible. And the fact that you're so willing to just like put yourself out there and put information out there is really fucking cool. And yeah, happy to help. And also like the back and forth that we have on scripts, when I've got a script and I throw it at you, like 100%, you've been incredibly helpful with some of the stuff that I've put together when I've been in a little bit of a bind and going like, I don't know how to word this thing. Ali, can we bounce this idea? And you're like, you know, 100% of the time you've been down to just be like, all right, we're going to do that. And like, and then you give me like 17 different angles that are like, I didn't even think of that. And I think that's really cool. So being able to like have that relationship with you, like I understand, like there's been, I've been helping you a lot, but also you've been helping me a lot too. And I'm incredibly thankful to you as well.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you both. Like the mutual appreciation, I think, is what like characterizes a healthy friendship. Like you're basically kin to me, and I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Yay.
And I want to give Jen, who's not in the stream, because Jen's been, you know, having some stuff lately, but you've been incredible as well. You've been one of the biggest supports. When I mentioned that if I was going to do a channel, I wanted to do an allyship show, you told me I wasn't even allowed to look for a co-host because you were going to be that. Like you just straight up told me, nope, this is happening. You don't get a choice.
Right.
And like our chemistry on air and behind the scenes is incredible. You've been one of the closest friends that I think I've had in the community, like right there alongside Cirrus and Raz, who I also owe a debt of gratitude to. Cirrus is the one who brought me into the community and was also part of the reason that I stuck around. And Jen, you were there that night too. You helped me out, and you've been there for so many of my rants, same as Ocean. You've bounced ideas back and forth, but you've also been there when I needed somebody to roll around in the mud with. Like when I needed to just be fucking mad about something and have somebody listen, you've been there. You've talked shop, you've shared. You're one of the best people in my life, and I'm grateful to have you. So now that we have like given everybody fucking diabetes at the end with just all of the gratitude, thank you guys again so much for all of your support as well. And now I'm on the road to 5K. Like that's where we're at. And I'm hoping that you guys will all be on the road with me. So remember, guys, we're stronger together.